Welcome back to the Manor. Julian McBain here, and we are still doing migration. I mean, did you expect any less? I do migration until migration's over. But actually, there are a few things that I found very interesting in the psychology lectures I've been listening to. I wanted to share some insights with you. So before we get into that, if you're new to the channel, welcome to the Manor. Please take a moment and subscribe down below. We are on the road to 13 million subscribers, one subscription at a time, so make sure you subscribe. Okay, so the lectures I'm listening to are about personality psychology. It's the origins of personality and the stories that underlie the structures that we have built society around. And the most famous of which, of course, is the hero's journey, which, you know, if you look at the core of everything that is, basically we're all the heroes of our own story. And, you know, in most cases, that is fundamentally correct. We are all the heroes of our own story, and it's actually very common to hear in the way people discuss things. Because, I mean, you should be the hero of your own story. If you're the villain in your own story, that's a bad story, man. You got to find a better story to be living out. So we're basically the heroes of our own story, and in order to enact that heroic basis, we have to find an adventure with which to go on. And I think that's something about Entropia Universe that I find is very important to the way we kind of create our own world here, because MindArc's kind of given us a backdrop with which to work with, but the story itself is pretty much non-existent. I mean, some of the planet partners have kind of a quest line. It's nowhere near as integrated like as a World of Warcraft or a Final Fantasy, but it's kind of like a quest line light, right? You get to do some things, and they get you some power-ups, and you get to learn the mechanics of the game, but beyond the basics, it's just not there. And you literally have to make your own story. And that's really interesting, because basically that's what you have to do in real life as well. And the fact that Entropia is actually kind of keyed in on this and figured out, okay, well, if you put players into a bounded space and say, okay, you have to come up with you know, here's the story we have created for you. They've got to keep creating content, right? Wow, it's busy out here today. They just have to keep coming up with stuff for you to do, and oftentimes that, you know, that means they're constantly harping on stuff. But instead of doing that, MindArc took a much they outsourced the need to do that to the players themselves by basically saying, we're going to give you a platform with which to work. Go have at and create your own adventure, and we'll expand it by allowing other people in. But the baseline of the story itself is going to be completely player created. And that was brilliant, because the thing about players, the thing about us as individuals, is we all want to be heroes, right? And so this allows us to kind of live in this bounded space and create our own history and story, and become perhaps even the person we wish we could be in real life, but can't quite do so because, well, there's no monsters running around, right? So that's really fascinating. So I kind of got to thinking about that. And I mean, imagine Entropia Universe is at its core a grind. And it's a hard grind, man. I mean, I've been playing this since 2017. I'm not even level 50 yet. And that's good. I think that's a good thing, because it should not be like a lot of your modern MMOs. They can fast track you to the end game so that you can play the current content with your friends. And I'm like, no, that's not necessarily good. I mean, yes, it means that if you finally convince that one friend to play, you're not having to hang back and do things that you don't want to do. But at the same time, it robs them of a lot of the experience. And then they may not be as good at the end game as they wish they could be and would be had they been able to play all of the content since the beginning, because they learn all the nuanced moves they would need to learn that you learned playing it the hard way back when the content was fresh. And Entropia Universe completely eradicates that whole possibility by saying, hardcore skill grind, go have at. And that's brilliant. I think that's an absolutely brilliant model for them to use. And it allows us to... And because there's no real focus on the storyline outside kind of this broad framework that they provided us, our individual stories are what really matter. And I really think that was one of the most intelligent things that MindArc could have done. And I don't even know if it was intentional or not, but regardless of whether it was intentional or if it was because the technology was so new when they produced the game, they didn't have what they needed to create a really complex quest chain. It really worked out. It really worked out well. And I think that that's why Entropia Universe has been able to remain relevant despite all of the competition that exists in the world today. Because, I mean, almost every MMO ends up as a head outside the cave of World of Warcraft. The only people that can hope to face up against Blizzard toe-to-toe is Square Enix, because they've been around for so long, and they started in the space, and they've been doing it for so long that no one can outtell a story like they can. I mean, that's just, as far as I'm concerned, that there's no competition to Square Enix when it comes to storytelling. The only people who can come even close to them isn't even Blizzard. It's the people who made Star Trek Online, and they've got all fucking Paramount behind them. So that's a different story altogether. That's like saying, okay, we're gonna take a movie set, put a real games company in charge of it instead of a movie company that produces its own spin-off, and then give them the power of the actual script writers of an actual TV show that is a cult favorite. So that's kind of outside the realm of most MMOs, whereas and World of Warcraft's like a distant third when it comes to storytelling, and they've gotten worse over the years because the story plot of Warcraft was actually really well written, and then they just got fucking lazy and started taking characters and turning them into comic book supervillains. That was just stupid. Because that was what Garrosh was. He was basically Hitler. And Stalin and Mao all kind of rolled up into one asshole of an orc. And then they took him and they said, well, we've got this fan favorite strong female lead, let's turn her into a villain, even though she's like this anti-hero that everyone absolutely loves. We're just going to turn her into some awful person. It's like, no, that's where you lost me. And they lost a lot of their fan base over that, and they should have, and they deserved it. And so that's that whole thing. But instead, Mindark, they just let the players go, and it's like, go live in this world where being heroic should be a normal thing, and you're not the center of a story that everyone else is also the center of. You basically create your own content. And the only other game I am really aware of that did it that way is Albion Online, which is a relatively new contender. The only difference between them and this is they're fantasy-based, which, okay, fine, fair enough. I think that there's room for a sci-fi-based version and a fantasy-based version. And they are, they're not real money. They're not a real money game, which, okay, fine. That's fair, too, because maintaining an RCE is not exactly what you call easy. And so you've got this situation where you have to create your own adventure, and that's just like real life. And so it's a good metaphor for real life, because in a way it is real life. This blends and I've said it before, the Entropia platform really blends the balance between virtual and real space. And I think that is, whether it was intentional or not, it's true. And so, because the relationships here that you have with other players actually matter, and how people treat you within the game world. Because if you ever meet them in real life and realize who they actually are, you'll probably treat them the same way in real life that you do in the game. And there's actually a lot of evidence for that across time, because World of Warcraft being the biggest one, this is a great way to create an example for it. The players in the game have created lifelong friendships and even marriages through just meeting within the game, because you get to know someone without any preconceptions. You learn from them as you contend to solve puzzles and problems in a space where you have to be on the ball all the time. And that's a good way to learn something about someone. You really learn about yourself doing stuff like that. And although the difficulty is mostly in thumb reflex and finger reflex and in mental reflex, as opposed to like lifting heavy objects and completing, like building buildings and stuff, you really learn about the tenacity of a person when you throw them up against something that just hammers at them over and over and over again. And I think that's fundamentally why the guilds that got together and were able to take out the big dungeons early on in the game, they basically will always be there. Those people will be friends forever. And, I do know of love stories where, they've met in the game and they met in real life and they ended up getting married. That's awesome. And the fact of the matter is that's a further blending of the virtual versus the analog. And I think we're going to see more of that over time. And the creation of VR MMOs like Orbis Online, or Orbis VR, which is a good game. I don't play it very much, and part of the reason I don't play it very much is because of the space within which I have to play, and the fact that the sword work in the game does not function in a way that I am really used to. Being a fencer, I like to be able to stab things and then jump in and out of combat, and in that game, it's very much stand toe-to-toe with the enemy, which I don't mind standing toe-to-toe, but it's sword, shield, and it's a little too mechanical for my taste in that type of... If I'm gonna fight like that, I kind of want to be playing something with like a controller, but it's not a bad game. It's not a bad game at all, although I think I'd probably have more fun if my son could play with me, which, because of limitations on bandwidth and stuff, I'm not even sure if we had a second headset that would be possible. But it's something I think I'll explore going forward at some point. It's just not something I'm interested in doing right this second. I do think that virtual reality has plenty of stuff that we haven't even come close to doing, and it's going to further blend that to gray out the difference between digital and analog until it basically disappears. And in doing so, we're going to find so many new stories for us to tell to each other, through each other. And it's going to be very similar to what we're doing here in EU. Got him. Notice how it will not target the one I'm trying to target. There we go. And so it got me to thinking, like, content creation, right? EU is the only game that I can think of that's really super popular where there's, like, zero machinima. Like, Fallout's got machinima, and World of Warcraft has machinima, and Final Fantasy has machinima. No one's created, like, a talk show in Entropia Universe. I think it's a far undervalued niche that really, I think, needs to actually come forward. I think it would be awesome if someone would start like the Entropia Universe podcast, where they just interview other players. This is what your niche is. This is what your focus is on. Why do you play Entropia? Oh, you play it for a living versus, oh, you just play it to kind of de-stress, or you like the challenge of having real money be involved, or you want to be an investor, or you are an investor, or you're a landowner. Honestly, if I had the time, I would totally do that. Like, I'd spend the money, I'd invest in an apartment, I'd set it up as a studio, right? Because you have to have a studio for shit like that. And I'd like dial up people like Death House and Bonnie and JBK and Serial Overdrive and Lore Spade, and have them have these interviews in this podcast format, maybe do like a weekly podcast. Kind of Joe Rogan style, where it's focused on the avatars. I think if someone did that, I think it would be very popular in the Entropia space. I think people would love it, and they'd all be flocking to be on the show so they can tell their story, because people are invested in their own stories. You are, whether you believe it or not, you're very invested in your own story. And of course, you should be invested in your own story. That's your life. But the thing people don't realize is people love to tell their own story, right? They love to have the means to tell their own story in such a way that it doesn't make them feel like it's bragging in a lot of cases. And when doing an interview, that's very much a space where it's like, it doesn't feel like bragging, because they're asking you for the information. It's like, well, what do you think about this? Well, when did you do that? Tell me more about how you got there. And if you ask the questions, people are more than happy to answer them. You just have to be able to get them to sit down with you. And oftentimes it's not hard. It really isn't. It's just having the time and the space and the capability to put all of the things together. And I think that there's a lot of potential there. Somebody do that. Please, I'd watch it. And I'm willing to bet you'd find plenty of people out there that would watch it too. You could get the devs all on. You could get I'm willing to bet that if you got even marginally successful, you'd have the devs from each planet being like, hey, we created this studio space for you to do it so that you can do it on our planet. You know, actually, that might help some of the struggling planets like, you know, Cyrene, which I know is still low pop. You put something like that on Cyrene, and that'll instantly increase their value significantly. And I know Cyrene doesn't have apartments right now. Currently, I think it's Calypso, Monria, Toulon just got some. Rocktropia has some. The asteroids have some. So really the only ones that don't have apartment, and Next Island even has some of the sales spaces. So I think, does Arcadia have apartments? They've got land areas, but I don't know that they have apartments. Either way, I mean, it might be that Cyrene's the only one that doesn't have ownable land spaces. That would be kind of sucky. But either way, you could do it. You could absolutely do it. And I think there's a lot of potential there. I really do. And I think it would behoove us to look at the potential and really think about how we can make this even bigger. And I think what's going to really do, what's really going to bring it so that it's better, is when they move to the Unreal Engine. Especially if they manage to do it so smoothly that nothing breaks, which I 100% guarantee will not happen. And that's not me. I'm not poking fun at MindArc for that. I am not casting shade at MindArc. Migrating engines is incredibly complex. And so I 100% expect there to be significant and severe bugs. It might even break the game temporarily. So long as our accounts aren't affected, I'm not too worried about it. Although I am a little nervous about that bit. But I 110% believe that the migration to UE5 is not going to be smooth. And I am not blaming MindArc for that. That's just the nature of programming. That's just how it works. And so that's me being more realistic, not me being pessimistic. But once it's smoothed out, once the bugs have been solved, Entropia Universe is just, it'll be in the 21st century, and there's going to be no holding it back. I think that it's going to explode. And all we have to do is increase the exposure to it, because the more players we have in the platform, the better off it is for the existing players, because the new players are going to buy shit off the existing players. They're going to ask us for assistance. They're going to ask us for help. They're going to need mentors. And I think that's part of the design of this platform that MindArc really did well. And I don't think it was necessarily intentional, but it did end up working out that way. And so they actually created a platform where perpetuation by the player base doing the advertising actually really helps the player base. And so it makes it worthwhile to us for us to do it. And with UE5 coming around, I think that's going to be exponentially explosive. And because the more people that are in here, the more interactions we can have, the bigger the story we can build around ourselves. And what that will do is it'll increase our ability to do things in-game, which I think in the long run will actually build up those social structures that we may not have. Because a lot of gamers, especially those of us in the older millennial generation, you know, we were outcasts as kids. I know that being geek today is like, that's cool. But I come from the age of geeks versus jocks. And believe me, the jocks always won. And I think that juxtaposition of that new dynamic is very interesting, and I think that we are going to find that as this becomes more popular, there's going to be more money in the game, and it's just going to explode, and then we will build more stories around it. And so I think that that's amazing. But yeah, the funny thing about stories is that those stories there's archetypal. There's a term called archetypal, which means if you distill all of the stories down to a basic plot line, that's your archetype. So the most common of which is the hero has something happen, they have to go fight a dragon to get a treasure, right? That's like the most basic archetypal story ever created, and it's all over the culture. Like Lord of the Rings is probably the most obvious one in there, but it shows up in D&D and Forgotten Realms. It's the dark genie of Dark Cloud. It's fundamentally a dragon. I mean, yeah, we don't call it a dragon, but I mean, if you look at the dark genie, it's basically a dragon, right? And then you have the dragon doesn't necessarily have to be a literal dragon. It can be a sorcerer or evil king or queen or what have you. the final boss per se is the dragon, and when you beat the dragon, you get the treasure, and sometimes the treasure is money, and sometimes the treasure is world peace, and sometimes the treasure is the girl, right? That's just how that works. And in Entropia, it's really interesting because we're on this really grind hall type thing where we're not necessarily we're not this OP type character, or we're not building into an OP type character that can take on these huge dragons, but we're still taking on big dragons. Like even these Longtooth, a level 19 Longtooth to a new player would just wipe them the hell out. But after years of building yourself up, you can take these on and you can contend with them at their level. And that really makes you feel good. And the bigger the things, like I've watched JBK, John Black Knight, from the Titans of Space. I've watched him take on those giant-ass Proterons, and I think he solos them. And it's like, dude, I can't even imagine taking those on. And I mean, if you look at a Proteron, it's basically a snake monster with legs, right? I mean, it's this giant-ass neck with teeth that literally come out of the mouth, stretch out of the mouth to bite you. And it's just very snake-like, which is not surprising because snakes are fundamentally the base enemy of humanity, and that's not just because of religious scripture. That's how we evolved, right? That there's a reason that in every culture, the mythology, the center of the world is a tree, and the big evil is a snake. If you look in Norse culture, you've got the world tree, Yggdrasil, and around the world tree hangs Midgard, which is a snake that eats the world. And it's because when we were tree-dwelling creatures, the thing that ate our children, and sometimes us, were snakes. And so that's very interesting, and that informs all of the underlying structures of how we created our societies. And that's why the stories that are told across time are all almost, if you distill them to their core, they're all the same. A great example, in The Sword and the Stone. The King Arthur stories are one of my favorite stories. I love the King Arthur stories. King Arthur pulls a sword from a stone to become king. Before that, there was a sword in a tree in Norse mythology. That sword is the same sword that God put in the ground to cast us out of the Garden of Eden in the Bible. And there's similar stories like that all around in every culture there ever was. And it may not exactly be a sword in the ground or in the stone or in a tree, but it's similar notions that create this bigger story. And so if you distill, like I said, if you distill all of the hero's journey stories, it's basically stupid hero journeys forth from home to fight dragon and win treasure. That's the archetypal hero's journey. And they always run into like 10,000 tragedies along the way, and that's what builds them up. That's what creates them. It forges them. And that's basically what you do in Entropia, because you're out here, you're finding your way in the world, you're figuring out who you are, and you end up dying. But because it's a game, you can be resurrected, and so that's overcoming the obstacle. And if you can go back and kill the mob before it disappears or before someone else can tag it, because it does reset after a short period of time, you might even get the money you lost back. And it adds that real consequence, which makes it even better than a lot of regular video games. And so that's really fascinating that by tying it to a real-world consequence, we find more meaning in playing a game that has no plot, is nothing but is quite possibly the absolute grindiest game ever created since Final Fantasy 1. And I think Final Fantasy 1 is the only game that comes close to being as grindy as this. And we still play it religiously. And I want you who are watching this, if you can do so with a straight face, comment that I'm a liar in the comments. Tell me I'm wrong. Because you can't, honestly. There's a reason this game calls to us once you play it. And a lot of players get sucked in very quickly. And I know you've got a lot of the games critics out there who expect all this shit to come from it. And it's like, but global! 70? 70 pet on the dime. Thank you, Mindark. Well, it's like 69.99. It's close enough. And I think that's one of the mistakes that a lot of game critics have when it comes to Entropia Universe, because they discount the underlying structures that create the society inside of the platform. They just want something where it tells them a story and they go through the motions and that's all they got to do. And maybe there's a boss fight at the end. But they're not really seeing what underlines, what girds the culture of Entropia Universe. Because we've got a culture. We have a culture, we have a society, and it's all created by the players. The devs have very little to do with it for the most part on how the culture itself is created. And I mean, yes, there are devs that are in the game and they help build culture. DME is a fantastic example of this, along with NIDev, whose name escapes me at the moment. But they actually, they communicate with us and they help build that culture. And I think that's why Monria is so successful in particular. Monria and Toulon. But largely speaking, the culture of Entropia Universe is 100% player driven. And because of that, we can't get enough of it. That's why you keep coming back. That's why you continue to grind. That's why you keep depositing money. That's why you keep doing all the things. Because we can create our own adventure, the adventure we want to play. We only have to play within the bounds of that particular adventure. And if we can't make it that far, we can do things to get to that part. And I really think that that's why this has been so successful. And I never really thought about the psychological implications of it. I'm not even I am a lay psychologist at best, right? I'm actually a philosopher / theologian, if you want to get to an academic title set. And even then, I'm not particular. Philosophy, I would consider myself pretty high up on for someone who has never gotten an academic doctorate. No, because I did. Okay, yeah, I'll accept theologian. I'll accept theologian, although not to the degree of which dedicated theologians are. So let's parse that, right? I'd be like theologian baccalaureate level, not theologian doctorate level. Although I have taken, I did take a seminary course at the doctorate level. I didn't finish it, but I did attend. I got through a good chunk of it. Very high level, very difficult material, very interesting. A struggle for someone who's in college, a junior in college, by the way, because that's when I decided to do it. I don't even know why they let me in. They just said, okay, yeah, if you want to take the course. It was a correspondence course. So they didn't really check credentials. They just assumed that if you were going to pay the money for a course that you weren't up to speed to be able to attend, then that's your own fault. And I 100% agree with that. They shouldn't gatekeep academic classes unless it's with a course that you absolutely require to get into it, just because it's a 500 level or 600 level course. I think it's really dumb. If someone thinks they can attend and make it, it's their cash. You know what I'm saying? So okay. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Please like, share, and subscribe down below. We are on the road to 13 million subscribers, one subscription at a time, so make sure you subscribe. And as always, make sure I really appreciate all of your support. Please consider going to patreon.com/Julian McBain and becoming a patron. I will be producing a video. Actually, it's on my docket for today to release for the same day that this comes out. So that I record this on Saturday, it releases on Sunday. It should be out by the time this video released. For the August exclusive. So go check it out on Patreon, and you all have a great day.